Good day, good day. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Jay, and this is Homeschool Yo Kids Podcast. Today we have with us Laurie. Laurie, introduce yourself.
I'm Laurie Block-Spiegel. I'm a veteran homeschooler and educator, specializing in student-centered learning using creative games and intuitive games. So that's really my focus. I'm also an author, and I have a new book out that is called Letting Them Lead: Adventures in Game-Based Self-Directed Learning, that talks a lot about my homeschooling experiences and my experiences working with groups of homeschoolers.
I'm so excited to get into this. First, let's talk about the vet title. How long have you been doing this?
Um, I started homeschooling in 1994,
1994. Oh, speak on it. Yes.
and I'll tell you, it was in New York City. I had two kids, one in elementary and one in pre-K, two boys, and homeschooling was not a clear choice. In fact, my kid, who was 9 at the time, the reason why I started homeschooling, when he was 5, he asked me to homeschool him, and I don't even know how he heard about it. He's
Yes.
a very smart kid. He must have overheard some other mother mention it, and he came to me and he asked me, and I did not hesitate to say no. I mean, I didn't even think about it. I said, "You're the only kid we have so far. I don't have my kids. My friends don't have kids. This is where you're going to find your friends, and I will teach you as best I could at home." And honestly, in hindsight, that response meant that I was aware I was sending him to school solely for social reasons.
Mm,
I personally did not get my education from school, even though I was in school full time.
of
All of
course.
my learning came from home. I had a very enriched home life, and
Mm,
school was a lesson in how to suffer through crushing boredom.
Oh,
Uh,
speak
and
on it.
that
Yes.
was like the skill that I learned, was how not to speak up, how not to rock the boat, how to suffer through complete lack of engagement and entertainment.
Mm.
And at home, I was getting, my parents were both professors. We had professors from all around the world visiting us and staying in our home. I could ask anybody anything I wanted. I had travel experiences. I taught myself how to read when I was 3. So
Wow.
that's because my mom refused when I asked her. She said, "No, you'll learn in school." And I wasn't going to wait. I was having too much fun being read too. I wanted to be able to do that for myself. So
Oh, no.
I remember I had already memorized some books that she was reading over and over again. And I knew Hop on Pop by heart, and it rhymed, and I cracked the code just by examining every word in Hop on Pop and reading Dr. Seuss to myself. So by the time I went to kindergarten, I was reading.
And you were bored.
In school,
Yeah,
because
that's what I'm
there,
saying.
if
Because if
you
you
know,
were
at
reading by
home,
the time you got there, I could just imagine what that curriculum was doing to you then.
it was, it was, I suffered through it. I suffered through it. So I just sort of assumed, I think, like many people, that my kids would have a similar childhood to what I had, that this is what I knew. What I knew was you go to school and you learn at home. So, so I already had that mindset. And it wasn't until school became a real problem. First, public school became a problem, then we tried private school, that became a problem. And now, mid year, my kid was out of school, and the local public school had a terrible reputation, and it had a reputation for bullying. And I thought they would eat my kid up alive, because he had a real smart mouth, and he knew how to insult people really well. And I thought, oh my gosh, they're going to lie in wait for him. So, so, so I honestly, when I made the decision to homeschool, I tell this story so many times because I've since become this outspoken advocate for homeschooling. But I made the decision in tears.
Oh,
I
wow.
homeschooled against my will, kicking and screaming all the way into it. And yet, within maybe 2 weeks, I realized that we had made the best decision of our lives and that it had already had this profound effect on not just my kid, but on the family as a whole. So taking him out of school and homeschooling him, a lot of things became clear to me. One was that school had been the elephant in the room that we were all tiptoeing around, that I had become like the school's cop, that I was making my kids go to sleep when they weren't tired, making them get up when they were, making them do homework we all thought was senseless and a waste of our time. And, when I started homeschooling my youngest, I'll tell you that story. When I started homeschooling the oldest, I didn't want the youngest one to think I was playing favorites. So I gave him the choice. He was already in pre-K, and he said to me, well, isn't school a building where everybody goes just to learn? And I said, well, that's the general idea. And he said, then why isn't everybody there all the time? And, I really didn't want to force my own opinions on my kids. I wanted them to make up their own minds. I figured they were going to guess how I felt about things anyway. So I tried to stay back and let them have their own experiences. So I told him, if that's how you feel about it, give it a shot. And so he went into kindergarten. We had a fantastic kindergarten teacher for him, and he had a great year.
Nice.
But then when he went into first grade, it was downhill from that point on. In second grade, he was crying himself to sleep because he didn't think he'd pass the practice test. He thought he wouldn't get promoted to third grade. Now, I went in to see the teacher, and I said, my kid is crying himself to sleep because he thinks he won't make it to third grade. And she laughed. That was her response. She laughed, and she must have seen my face, and she said, I'm sorry for laughing, but it's unthinkable that a kid like your son wouldn't get promoted to third grade. And I said, exactly. So where did he get that idea? And she said, I don't know. I said, he keeps saying he doesn't want to be left behind. And she said, oh, well, whenever we practice the test, I tell them that they can't fall behind. So this is a 3-hour practice test for kids and that little.
3 hours.
And then they had another one the next year and another one the next for the all-important 5th grade test. So, I couldn't wait to take him out. I was seeing how well this was happening with his brother, but I waited till he made up his mind. And at the end of 3rd grade, he said, the kids are starting to get not nice. Because, when you pack 36 kids in a room, the kids start to get not nice.
36 little people that age. Oh my goodness.
And he said, and the teachers are starting to be a problem. Of course, the teachers have been a problem for me for years. So I said, great. So 1998 is when I started homeschooling the two of them together. And 1994, I had one homeschooled and one in school. And then for about 2 years in middle school, the older one went back. And then he decided to homeschool high school. So there were times I was homeschooling. I had the younger one in school, then I had the older one in school. But when the whole family was homeschooling, it was kind of like a dream. I remember the first year we had that, I said, we're taking our vacation as soon as school starts. There was this just exhilarating feeling that we were going off season. Every place was still open, but it was empty. And all these poor souls were suffering in school. And we were on our way to Canada, to Atlanta, Canada. And that trip, and that was, the first year we homeschooled both of them. I'm going to tell you the story about that trip. So we stopped off in, I forget the name of the city in New Brunswick. And there was a big children's museum. And we were spending the night there. I said, well, I know what we're doing in the morning. So we walked into the big children's museum, and the ground floor was the children's museum, but upstairs it was for the adults. And the older one made a beeline for all the games in the children's museum, and his dad followed him. But the younger one stood in the hallway and looked up and couldn't take his eyes off this huge skeleton of a whale floating from the upstairs science floor. And he I said, so you want to go up there? And he's nodding. He never went into the Children's Museum, the little one.
Oh,
He went straight
wow.
up there. And there was a video of the guy who had found the bones and put the skeleton together. And he must have watched that video 10 times. And, this kid, he's loved whales since age 2. That was his thing, was whales. So this wasn't a big surprise to me. And he was the quiet thinker. The other one was the talkative doer, So we're watching this, and this little video was taken on Grand Manan Island, which we were going to drive right by that on our way home. So I leaned down and whispered to him, would you like to try to interview that guy who's on? And he's going, yeah. So the rest of the trip, we drove up to Prince Edward Island, and we saw these beautiful beaches, and it's idyllic, really. And the whole time when they were sitting in the car, he's writing questions. He's thinking about what he wants to ask the whale guy. And he and his brother are arguing over the questions in the back seat. So I look up the hours, we take a ferry, the Seabird and Whale Research Center is directly across the street from the ferry dock. All we have to do is walk from the ferry. And I knock on the door, and this sunburnt woman opens the door, and she says, I'm sorry, but we're closed. Yesterday was our last day. I'm packing everything up, and I'm moving the research center down to, the Outer Banks. And I said, but we came so far, and he wants to interview a whale scientist, and he has questions. And she looks at me, and she looks down to this little boy whose hand I'm holding. And the next thing I know, she's yelling over her shoulder, I am busy for the next hour because I'm being interviewed. And all the workers left her alone. And she takes us into this information room that had information floor to ceiling on whales and seabirds. And he could have stared at everything there for a day, but he gets down to business. He sits down at the little child's desk, and he opens up his notebook, and she talks to him just like she would talk to an adult. And he asks her every question, and he takes notes. And he comes to this question that he and his brother argued about for a long time. And he says, my brother says that inside a sperm whale's head, it's full of gunk. Is this true? And she laughs, and she says, well, I wouldn't call it gunk, but there is a gelatinous substance. And she starts talking about that. And he asked, how they track whales. And at the end, she says, walk down to the dock. You'll see some fin whales floating by at sunset. You'll see them. That was this magical experience. And this sort of culmination of what homeschooling could be, that you can be using the world, that you can be doing this hands-on, that you can be learning in ways that school doesn't allow you to learn, that here was a project that included language arts, science, communication, poise, all of these skills. And he did it because it was the most exciting thing to him he could imagine doing. So he did it fully. And after that, I started asking every year, so who are you going to interview this year? And they would each choose somebody who was doing something that interested them. So I didn't expect them to come back to me talking about colleges when they were still in elementary school and middle school. But invariably, that would be one of the questions. So how did you find this path? Or where did you get your training? And my oldest one, who was into theater and costume design, came back and after interviewing a costume designer, came back and said, I didn't know you could learn costume design at Boston University. It must be so cool to go to Boston University. And then my younger one said, do you know in Brooklyn College they have fish that have been to outer space? Brooklyn College must be super cool. And Brooklyn College's marine biology department was working with NASA. So they knew stuff. They found stuff out that I had no clue about. I wasn't mentioning college to them that young. So this sort of learning from the world, learning in a hands-on way, learning focused on your interests, where lo and behold, every other academic subject could intersect with that interest. It was amazing how much science and math and history my son learned through theater. So it just could all be there, and they could become the people they wanted to be. They could discover who they were. They could find this sense of direction and have fun learning. So you can see how it changed all of our lives. I think it also affected me that, I didn't start with child-centered learning. I started with a traditional academic approach because that's what I grew up with. But I also thought that if I could just build on what worked and do more of whatever worked and eliminate or change what didn't work, that maybe I'd be onto something. And I was lucky that I was able to see clearly what worked and didn't work. I think a lot of people get stuck in repeating what didn't work because that's all they know.
Yeah.
But I knew enough to look for the light in the child's eyes. I knew enough to know that engagement meant real learning was happening and boredom meant no learning was happening.
Mm.
So I knew that, from my own experience, but it's also common sense if we just think about it. So child-centered learning happened in degrees simply because that's where the engagement was. And so that's where the greatest learning experiences were. And whenever boredom appeared, well, I knew we were doing something wrong. Could I make that more fun? Could I make that more interesting? Could we come at it another way? And we did all of that. So and my sons were, as I already pointed out, they couldn't have been more different, personality-wise, interest-wise. So I knew very early on that not only would they have different careers, but different lifestyles, which turned out to be true. Completely. One is sits all day in front of his computer and he's a city kid, and the other is the reason I'm in Maine and he's on his feet all day. So they couldn't be more different in lifestyle, in temperament, in focus. So if you know this from the outset, and I think every parent and every teacher knows no two kids are alike, if you know this from the outset, why would you assume that they should all have the same identical education? You know they're going to have a different outcome. Don't you want to develop them, help them develop to be their best in the direction that they're going to be, instead of to try to force them to all be the same? So that also, this, when I first started homeschooling, I thought it would be so easy to get one of these one-size-fits-all curriculum. I thought, I just want to do less work. I honestly, I was terrified. I was daunted, not just the paperwork, but the idea that I was solely responsible for my kids' education. Of course, it took me about 2 days to realize I was always solely responsible for my kids' education, whether it was choosing the school. And I did take that approach. I was helping them with their homework and discussing everything with them. And I believe the kid who succeeds because of the support at home, not because of what's happening in school. So I was actually happy that that responsibility was just clearer for me, because it was always mine, or, the parents or the home life.
And it is.
Right, it is. And yet it terrified me. And back then, we're talking 94, homeschooling. The original founders of the largest homeschool support group in New York City, NYCHEA, were still members of the group. And that was the only support group. And I couldn't even find it, because this is pre-internet. It wasn't under H in the phone book. It was under I had to find it through word of mouth of people in other states who happened to have a list. And then I finally found a phone number to call. And by then I'd already gotten threatening letters from the DOE, and I was really quaking in my boots. That group had one sports event a week and one monthly meeting for families, and that was it. Now, within 5-10 years, we must have had a dozen sports alone. we not only, it was like we started with soccer in Central Park. Now we had soccer in Brooklyn, and we had basketball in Chinatown, and we had archery in Queens, and we had track in Northern, and it was like exploding. And if that was just sports, imagine what happened to everything else. And I was really lucky to witness this mushrooming of homeschooling. Also, when I first started, I did not have a single supportive person around me.
Mm.
I was lucky that my husband wasn't against it. He didn't understand it, but he knew we were at a crisis with our kids, and he wasn't about to get in the way of this decision. And he knew it wasn't a decision I wanted to make, that it was an act of desperation, to be honest, to that initial choice to homeschool. But I had friends who told me I was going to ruin my children's lives.
Mm.
I had people say, but I thought you wanted them to go to college. As if now they couldn't.
I was going to say,
there's
like,
such
canceled it out. Yeah.
I thought, well, that's ridiculous to think that they won't go to college. A lot of these responses, I just immediately rejected. I thought that they didn't make sense. But a lot of people believe those things, and a lot of people stay stuck in school because they believe that they have to have that high school diploma in order to go to college, which is not true. Most private colleges don't even ask for a high school diploma. There are so many things that are myths. Like there's the myth of socialization about homeschooling, these myths that it will hinder you. When actually, when it came applying to college, homeschooling was an asset. And I did not expect that. The selective colleges went after my kids.
Mm-hmm.
People don't know. So I think this was one reason why I started really volunteering a lot with homeschool groups, because it had been so scary for me. And here, I was raised by two top-notch educators. I had a top-notch education. I had more tools than most people have, and I was terrified. So if I was terrified, I thought, well, let me see if I can demystify this for people and make this more accessible for people and inspire them to do it, because it really is worth it if you can do it. So that was why I wrote the first book, which was, I have it here. This is Education Uncensored. And this was explaining why kids are struggling in school. I would have parents come to me mystified. Why aren't my kids are smart? They're good kids. Why are they struggling? And I would turn to the kids and I would say, well, let me ask you this. Can you be yourself when you're in school? And they'd laugh at me. Of course not. And I'd turn to the parents. How can you expect them to do their best when they can't even be themselves?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there are things that we miss. A lot of us, we couldn't be ourselves in school, but we forget that. And we forget how crushing that was. And what a missed opportunity that our true selves could be blossoming, and whatever that means, in those formative years. And all we need is a nurturing, encouraging environment for that to happen. We don't really need more. In fact, we can't really do more. You can't learn for someone else, and you can't force someone to learn. What you can do is create the environment that's ripe for learning, where they feel safe and comfortable, and where the things that they want to learn are present. And then all you have to do is sit back and watch them reach for it. And you become the guide and the cheerleader rather than the source of the information. I think that's another myth about teachers. No one knows everything. No one's the source. The world is the source. So instead of, and this was one of the things I watched in my younger son's first, second, and third grade classes in public school, with a teacher sitting behind a desk. The desk might even be on a raised platform, and there's this big barricade, and all these little children are below them at their little desks. And if they have a question, they have to walk the long walk up that aisle and ask the person behind the big.
Yes.
And I tell people at that age, you want to have trouble figuring out who the teacher is in the room. You want that teacher down on the floor, lost with the kids, where it takes you a while to say, oh, that's where the teacher is. They're in the middle of everybody having fun, doing something. That's what you want at that age. You don't want this rigid, orderly thing, because it shuts everybody down, to be honest. It shuts those little kids down. So, okay, I don't even know where this conversation went.
It's going great places. I'm just sitting back and just feeding off your passion because you're so passionate about it. And this is beautiful. And I know you've answered so many, questions that I receive all the time as people who are thinking about homeschooling or are fresh into homeschooling, just how that journey can look for them. And it's so funny that you started with your son asking to be homeschooling. I didn't hesitate to say no. You're thinking that you're going to say, I didn't hesitate to say yes. Of course I'll homeschool you. I'll lead you all the way. It was like, no, no, I'm not going to be able to do that. But what has blossomed from that no is amazing because you're so passionate about homeschooling. And
Well,
it's beautiful.
This is the thing here, encouraging my kids to follow their passions and their curiosity. That rubs off on me. I start thinking, well, what excites me? And here I started teaching in the homeschooling. By the way, I just have to interrupt this. Because my parents were professors and I didn't really get along with my parents too well when I was in my teens, I swore, in fact, my sister and I made a vow that we'd never become teachers. Never, ever, ever. That's the first chapter of my new book is I swore I'd never teach. And, eat those words, because when a calling comes knocking on your door, and now that's all I want to do. But I could never have imagined teaching small groups where I could do it the way I wanted to do it, where I could raise the bar, where my goal isn't curriculum, it's something greater. Curriculum's just a means to an end. What do we really want for our children? For them to find their own direction, to have that sense of awareness, to have that sense of confidence, to be able to learn anything. We want the big things. It's not about curriculum as an end. That's a meaningless goal, to be honest. And once you see curriculum as a means, your choice of curriculum is much more expansive. So, for example, to learn how to be an historian, it doesn't matter what period of history. To learn how to read, it doesn't matter what book. To learn how to write, it doesn't matter what genre, right? It's you will build those skills, and you'll build those skills so much better if it's something you care about, if it's something you feel connected to. I hear all the time from parents, and I heard this from teachers when my kids were in school. Well, when your kid or my kid does the thing that they really love, they're up early, they're working hard, we want them to apply that to all the things that they don't like. And I'm thinking, are you crazy? Who does that? Who does that? And
Why would you?
You gotta be a robot. Who can muster that level of enthusiasm for something they have no connection, no feeling for? And if you want to write really well, write about something you care about. Write about something you feel connected to. You want to, break the mold and do something beyond expectations? Find the thing you're the most interested in and the most curious about right now. So, this will put your kid off the charts, whereas keeping them reined into that standardized curriculum, it's going to be dull, it's going to be boring, and it's going to limit them. So, when I first started homeschooling, I looked at these one-size-fits-all curriculum. And every time I looked at them, I knew there was at least one part I'd want to change. I thought, well, my kid won't go for that, but I could switch that and make that better for him. Or, language arts is my field. I think these reading selections, no. It's like looking at reading the language arts goals for the Common Core in New York State. I'm appalled.
Mm.
You know, you introduced Shakespeare first, I think, in 10th grade with Macbeth. Well, if you want to hate Shakespeare, start with Macbeth. I introduce in middle school with, Midsummer Night's Dream. Read the fairy tales, read the comedies. You'll fall head over heels in love with Shakespeare. And I introduce it by kids reading the parts out loud because plays were meant to be heard and spoken. And in Midsummer Night's Dream, there's so many parts that and every scene we can recast. So if everybody wants to play Puck, they can all have a turn at Puck. But it's like, oh, I want to be Queen of the Fairies, or I want to be Bottom wearing all of these funny, funny roles, wonderful roles. Whereas in Macbeth, there's Lady M. And everyone can fight over her speeches. And it's just not the one to start with. And it's not, honestly, the age to start. And I warm them up with the Shakespearean insult game. Oh, they love that. They all get to insult each other in Shakespearean English, and they learn all these new words. And they're safe insults because nobody really knows what they mean until you think about it.
Love that.
So yeah, it's I wanted the standardized thing to work, but I knew right away it would never work. So I create student-centered curricula. I do this for families. Did this for my own kids. I created the Homeschool NYC website as an informational website, and there are some examples there. There's one, it might be a hard to find page, and I've got a new website because there are lots of problems with the old website, and it was easier to start a new one than to fix all the problems with the old one. So, and the new one is my full name, laurieblockspiegel.com, and I will put up, in the coming weeks, I'll put up examples of student-centered curriculum on the resource page. Lots of free resources. I've got pages of free online curriculum for students. I've also got, for homeschoolers, I've got also a resource, what is curriculum and how do I choose one? Because when you see this long list, that alone can be overwhelming. And just figuring out, a curriculum is just a plan. And it's good to have a plan, but it's awful if you can't change it.
Yeah.
Like, think about a vacation. What if, you plan to go to the beach and it's pouring rain? Don't you swap the museum for that day? Don't you do something different? What if you're on your way to a pre-planned destination and you go through a street fair? Are you really going to say, no, I can't even look at the street fair?
Yeah.
I mean,
have to make it to this other destination.
Right, because that was my schedule.
Block that fun. Yes, block that fun. Why would I want to go do that?
So I don't think of curriculum as a bad thing. I think of enforced curriculum as a bad thing.
Yeah.
And curriculum is what we make of it.
Yeah, I was gonna say it could just be suggestions, like, hey, you can do this, or an outline, not even necessarily a plan, but an outline of sorts of, oh, okay, we can implement this, or we could talk about this, but we could do it our way.
And it can be hands-on. It can be our nature walk. Today we're going to look at birds, or today we're going to look at leaves, or today we're going to draw a map of our walk. Or today we're going to write a sound poem and stop and listen to the sounds. Right? I mean, we can it's just a plan.
Yes.
And it's a plan that hopefully puts the child at the center and makes experiential learning possible, where it's not all from the book. And I love books, but if that's all you got, especially if they're textbooks or tertiary resources, it's going to be a dull day.
Very much so. Yes. Speak more on your game led. Like, what does that look like for a parent, involving games into the learning?
I just noticed a comment in a Facebook group where a mother was saying, all my kid wants to do is play. She has an age, all she wants to do is play. And I said, well, what does she want to do? She said, well, she just wants me to sit and play with her dolls, and I'm too busy for that, and she knows that. And I haven't been able to stop thinking about that comment, because because I think the little girl is saying that the learning isn't fun enough. I think we have to look at what's not being said, what's behind what's being said or being asked for. And I also think that playing with dolls doesn't have to be viewed as just playing with dolls. Like I woke up this morning thinking about this. What if the dolls joined a math lesson? I mean, and so maybe the math lesson takes a little longer. Maybe you have to whisper the math question to the doll and have the doll whisper it back and then have the doll pretend to whisper to mom. I mean, I don't even know what that would look like, but if the child can incorporate play for whatever play means to her into everything else, and I would, yeah, I would probably bring puppetry. If that's her thing is dolls, I'd bring puppetry. To me, I would take it straight to language arts. Those dolls are characters. Those dolls tell stories. Like, why can't, and those dolls have lives. And maybe we want to build a dollhouse and there's math, or make doll clothes and there's math. I would at least build on that. Even if I didn't eliminate the more traditional things that the mom is doing, I would still look for what is playful for this child. How can her imagination come into the center? But, when I first started working with groups of kids, I was playing games. I was doing things like Shakespearean insult games and warm-up games, and I figured learning should be fun. And that's how I was looking at games. But that's not how I look at them anymore. And that's because I was very fortunate to have advanced training in Spolin theater games and to do a lot of reading of the work of Viola Spolin and Neva Boyd. Neva Boyd was Viola Spolin's mentor. She was working in the settlement houses of Chicago with immigrant children. And, this was quite some time ago. And Viola Spolin was her protege, her assistant. And here you had these kids from all these different countries coming together. They didn't speak each other's language, and yet they were playing together. They'd play games together, and they'd bond, and they'd problem solve, and they'd help each other. And so witnessing this, Viola Spolin, who was an actress and a director, thought, I could take some of these children's games, these traditional children's games from around the world that she was documenting with Neva Boyd, and with just a little bit of tweaking, they could solve problems for me in the theater. They could solve problems for me as an actor and as a director. And so her first book was Improvisation for the Theater. And it was her son, Paul Sills, who thought, these games can stand on their own, and turned them into sketch comedy. He was the first director for Second City, and Second City spawned Saturday Night Live, sort of in a roundabout way. It was around age 50, I got this bug to teach playwriting. It just happened to me one day, and here I am, encouraging my kids to follow their dreams. So I thought, well, if I've got this, bug to teach playwriting, how am I going to learn how to do that? And lo and behold, this amazing teacher came into my life who had created the playwriting template for the 52nd Street Project. That's a free children's theater in New York City. I recommend, and that's how I fell in love with this idea. I started homeschooling when I did not have 2 nickels to my name. I mean, we did not get free Metro cards back then. I could afford bus or subway fare once a week. We walked to everything. And I thought, how can I do this with no money? And shouldn't I be in a rural environment where we can build things? And all of that flew out the window as soon as I realized the amazing library system, the amazing museums, it's a cultural, intellectual, and historical mecca here in New York City. Yeah. And every place is grant funded to offer something free to the community. And I couldn't believe how many world-class opportunities and learning opportunities were available to me and my kids for no cost. So, and I tell people, if you have a library card and you have internet access, you don't need anything else. There's so many choices. Your problem will be what to choose. That's
Yeah.
how vast the choices are. So, what was I talking about? I got back to this. That you do not need money to homeschool. That's an important point.
Very, very important. Please, you
Yeah.
can continue with that. Yes. No,
Right.
that we started with game led, talking about the games, but
Oh, I
leading
want to
it
get
up
back
into
to
that.
that.
Yes.
So, I think when I tell people I include games, I think most people think it's like Jeopardy and Bingo. You can plug any information into a game like that, and you can use it for test prep and for memorization, for curriculum retention. But you see, my goal isn't curriculum retention. My goal is an awakening,
Mm.
um, for their horizons to expand, for them to see the world differently and to see themselves differently, for them to grow as humans. That's really, I know it's a lofty goal, but you'd be surprised how often this goal is reached when you open the door for that. So that is my goal. And these games developed by Viola Spolin are about accessing the intuition and expanding the mind. And you start thinking differently and you start expanding your awareness of self, of others, of the essence of space. I in my first hour in a Spolin workshop, I knew my life would never be the same again. I knew my perceptions had been blown away. I was so used to, I realized I'd been looking at things with blinders. And now I could see behind my head, or I could see above and below. I could see, 360 degrees. And I had never had a 360-degree awareness before. I was always like this. So, bringing those games, and I learned those games because I knew I needed them to teach playwriting well. I could have done it the old-fashioned way where it's all table work, but somehow I knew. And my teacher, at the end said, "Oh, and by the way, you'll need this." And he handed me Violet Smolin's problem. And I'm looking at this book like the size of a Bible, and I'm thinking, "Oh, so where do I learn this?" And he goes, "I can't teach that to you yet." It took me 3 years to find that, but I found the Spolin-Sills family. And I worked with Viola's granddaughter and daughter-in-law and studied intensively over 8 or 9 years with them. And it had profound effects. So that first year, that I had the book and I had zero training and had never played a single one of these games in my life. And I'm reading the book and I can't understand half of these games because it's like, when you read instructions for a game and then finally you think, you know what, let's just play it and I'll figure out how to, because you have to play it to get it. And that's just the way games are. So I got together a group I had already been working with, and I told the family, I said, and the kids, they were all like middle school, young teens. And I said, if you will join me on this journey and do playwriting, you will be I admit you'll be my guinea pigs. I won't charge anybody anything. Let's just take this journey together and see what happens. And I would read the instructions for the game and they would try it out in front of me and I would discover what the game was. I mean, I was really coming to this from a place of not knowing. And yet, the end of that year, they all wrote these amazing plays and they performed them and they directed each other's plays. And it was this triple win, this profound experience for everyone, including me. And I knew I was never going to, not stop doing this. This was the thing that I've had a lot of great teaching experiences working with homeschoolers like this, but this is the most profound teaching experience I've had, and it's because of the nature of the work. So that first year, maybe the games were 15% of the classes. Now that ratio is probably reversed and the games might be 80-85%. And we're starting the writing at home and I'm in class and I'm sending them home to finish. We're really not doing, I call it writing on your feet, because it's very, kids will show up and they'll say, I have this idea for a scene. Can we get volunteers to act it out so I can see it? And they'll get more ideas. So it really is a physicalized form of writing, of getting ideas, testing out ideas, doing the writing. And by the time they've written the plays, they have the acting and directing skills to do the performance and direction part. So much fun. And I've done it with ages 8 on up. So it's a blast. It's a blast. So once I was really studying these games and using them and realizing the profound effect they had, I just started applying them to everything. And there's no class that I teach that doesn't include these types of games and other types of games. And, warm-up games, word games. We might start with a game of geography. That's like an old car game I used to play as a kid, but the kids could choose to make it food geography or animal geography. And we might start with all these different animals, and that might lead into animal poems, where we're already got these, or animal stories, or fable writing, or just as a game to get into it, where we're taking a traditional children's game and tweaking it to apply it to whatever the next plan is. But it really gets everybody going, it gets them relaxed, and it changes the relationships between the kids. It changes the relationships between the kids and the teacher when they see I'm just another player. I'm playing these games with them. I am not taking this authoritarian approach. I'm taking an approach that we're in this together and we're working side by side. And when they're doing an assignment, I'm usually doing the same assignment. Unless I need the time to prep at something else, I'm grabbing the time to write or to design something or to do like, hey, I want to make a puppet too. I want to make a puppet character, make a puppet play, or whatever it is that we're doing. I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't think it was fun. That I feel honestly sorry for teachers who have to read 50 essays on the same topic, especially if it's like the Battle of the Bulge or something. I mean, imagine 50 essays, and I feel sorry for kids who have to write them. That if the teacher is bored, imagine how much more bored the kid is. So I think there's a fine line between teaching and performing. And we have to it's like we've seen performances where it looks like they're just going through the motions and we don't feel engaged. And we've seen thrilling performances that are unforgettable where the person sort of disappears into the character. So, and there's all these different degrees in between. I think as a teacher, we've got to feel the passion and the enthusiasm. It has to be at least as much fun for us as it is for them if they're going to have fun. And hopefully their ideas come into the center. So my students know they have a lot of say in what happens. They know they can change the entire course on a dime. That if a problem arises or a question or a new curiosity arises, I'm quite willing to change all the plans right then and there on the spot. I don't want to miss a good teachable opportunity. It's like the way I feel about it, learning has momentum. It's an adventure. It's like if they've asked the question, if they're even just looking at something, they don't even have to say it. It's like they're on a moving train already. My job is to jump on that train with them, not to force the train to stop, maybe risk it going off the tracks, to force them to come on my little buggy ride. Where's that going to get me? It's like if interest is already present, learning is already happening. Yeah. If interest is completely absent, you can do cartwheels and you won't make learning happen. Mm-hmm. So it's like sometimes we can get the kids interested or get them engaged by sharing enthusiasm or by making it fun or by asking the right questions. But our best bet is a question they're already asking. My kids used to ask so many questions that, and we'd be busy, we'd be on our way somewhere else. And what I would do is I'd grab one of those colored Post-it notes and I would say, what a great question. And I'd write the question down and I'd stick it on the wall. And at one point we had a whole wall covered with Post-it notes. And whenever there was a free moment, I'd go, let's go pick a question. Let's go chase the question. And my response would be, so how do you think we're going to answer this question? What is your idea? How could we? So one question was, who were the Nobel Prize winners the year I was born? Another question was, if there's a purpose for everything, why does corn have silk? You know, they were interesting questions, and any question could lead you down a rabbit hole of learning,
Yeah.
and they would be so excited. And by asking them, it's sort of like playing catch. They toss the ball by asking the question. I throw it back by saying, how are we going to figure that out? They give me back an idea. I give them an idea. And before you know it, we are at the computer, at the library, doing an interview, reading a book, going to a museum, finding all these myriad ways of researching and learning, not accepting one textbook for it, maybe doing something hands-on, maybe visiting a farm, talking to a farmer if it's about the corn. There's so, and by the way, corn silk turns out to be all about reproduction. I mean, I've learned more about whales than I ever wanted to know. But just this honoring of the question, instead of in school being told, I'm sorry, we don't have time for that, or we'll get to it later. And then the kid's heart just sinks because the kid knows they won't get to it later.
Aw.
Right.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, I love that. I love that the idea of I just got this whole pack of index cards where I'm like, oh, okay, I'm gonna start doing that because like you said, the questions definitely come. They pour in, And I'm just like, a lot of times it's while I'm driving too. And I'm like, okay, well, we're gonna look that up. Like we'll look that up later, or let me stop and then we can look it up, things like that. But definitely writing them down will help because some of them are pretty I'm curious too.
I know. I'm
Yes.
telling you, it's more interesting to come up with a good question than to find a good answer. It just is. A good question leads to another question. And those good questions, they are the basis for the projects, for the experiments, for the games created by kids, for the stories written by kids. They are the basis. The question gives you this idea, and the ideas that you can't stop thinking about, those are the ones worth writing about, worth experimenting on, worth building on, worth exploring and sharing.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Look, Laurie, I feel like we're gonna have to do a part two because you are just because your passion just leads this conversation. It's just like I can just sit back and listen, and I'm just taking notes, and I see the familiarity as far as like just the things that I feel, and it's like, oh my, yes, you were right
I
because you
know.
started before we started recording. We're like, I know we have a lot in common, and you are absolutely correct. You are absolutely
No,
correct.
honestly, I would love to interview you someday, Jay.
Yes. But before I let you go, I need first, what are all the services that you do provide families?
Well, I work as an educational consultant and a homeschooling consultant. I teach classes via Zoom or in person. I tutor. Uh, I create student-centered curricula. So I can give recommendations. I give referrals for no charge. I lead people to resources. I'm all about, look, there was a time when I was totally broke. I'm all about making it easy and cheap for people.
Yes.
I'm all about sharing information and encouraging, advocating. I will read from my books for no charge. I've really never turned anyone away who has a question or never turned anyone away for lack of funds.
Mhm.
So to me, it's important to get the information out. So I work with parents, I work with kids, I work with non-homeschoolers too. I work with adults. I've had so many adults say, "How we want to take your classes." So I've done that too. And I just want to say, in my new book, Letting Them Lead, I include a lot of curriculum that I created with the students for the students. So it's group curriculum that allows for individualized child-centered approach. And this is really what my first book was really for the homeschooling parent who wasn't sure what was going on. And this book is for the alternative educator and the homeschooling parent seeking to engage their kid more. They maybe already understand about child-led learning, but they don't understand that you don't need to do this only one-on-one, that there are all kinds of ways to do this in groups. And I think the first thing that I did was to create this make your own board game class. And that happened because my kids were making their own board games, and other parents said, "We want you to do this." And I said, "You don't need me." This is what I always start with. You don't need me. You need the blank materials. You go to bearbooks.com. You get these. It's very affordable. You get the blank books, the blank board games, blank puzzles, all this stuff. And they said, no, we need you.
No.
So I thought, well, if I'm going to teach a course, I need to make a plan. And what is it that I'm really teaching them while they're making these board games? So I decided I was going to introduce them to advanced level research skills, even if they were in elementary school, and all these different ways that it isn't just looking it up online. And I was going to introduce them to a variety of designs and the history of board games. And so in the first class, I asked the kids, and this is the only thing I'm going to ask of you in this class, choose something, a topic that you're already interested in that you want to learn more about. And that's what they base their game on. So they each become experts in their own field. They each teach that to the class. They each make a unique game that doesn't look like anybody else's game. And yet they're all learning a lot of fundamental skills. So this is possible in so many different areas with so many different subjects. And in that board game class, we get history, we get science, we get math. Every subject comes in the room because the kids bring it in. So that curriculum in detail, along with a chapter that describes exactly what happens in the course, that's in this new book. So any group can do it. Any, learning center, homeschool co-op, alternative school. I mean, what I do can happen in schools. What happens with my groups is possible in schools. It's just not likely to happen in the traditional public system, but it's possible. And I explain how in this book.
You're amazing.
So are you, Jay. So are you. Your homeschool expos. I think this is just wildly exciting.
So before I let you go, because I told you I have a interview to follow, and if I did not, we would definitely keep going. Look, I wish you would have picked the 11 o'clock, then we could have.
I was pleased on that end.
No, yeah. So before I let you go, 3 pieces of advice that you would give, like 3 things that you will like families to leave this conversation with, knowing they could be new homeschoolers or thinking about it, homeschoolers, just 3 things you would like them to know.
3 things I'd like them to know. Not to be afraid of taking the leap, not to worry that there might be gaps in learning if you take a student-centered approach. This question plagued me at the beginning, and it turned out to be absolutely groundless. My kids got so much more taking this approach, and they came to me with any gaps. They said, I've got a gap here or there. I need to fill it in. Not to worry about higher level learning. These kids, they're sought after by colleges. They get into colleges. They do well. They're in professions that run the gamut. They're doing well. So I have a lot of success stories from my homeschool graduates. So, and following that line, take the pressure off. Take a step away from the old-fashioned pressurized way of learning that deals with grades and numbers and deadlines and all of that, and play more, have more fun. Enjoy, these years, they fly by so much faster than you'll think. You want to build good memories. You want happy family times together. The learning will happen. Trust that the learning will happen.
Thank you so much, Laurie.
Thank you for
so much.
having me,
Of
Jane.
course, you are amazing. Like I said, we're gonna have to do a part 2.
Okay, anytime you say. Anytime.
Definitely will. I look forward to meeting you next month, and I know things are gonna be amazing already. So thank you. Thank you. I do appreciate your time. And I do appreciate the listeners. I do appreciate everyone who's taking that chance, who's trusting the process, who's believing in themselves. Understand that there are many Lauries available for you. There are people who are very passionate about homeschooling and that want you to succeed in doing so. So, hey, trust the process and homeschool your kids.